2021 psychological thriller written and directed by Castille Landon and starring Madison Iseman, Israel Broussard, Katherine Heigl, and Harry Connick Jr. Rain Burrows is a teenager living with her parents and dealing with early onset schizophrenia. When she begins to suspect that their next door neighbor has kidnapped a child, her suspicions are dismissed due to her history of having hallucinations. But when she meets a new guy at school, she and her new friend set out to solve just what is going on with the ever more sinister seeming neighbor. I think the best way to describe this movie, in a general sense, is take Rear Window, but imagine if Jimmy Stewart not only had trouble convincing Grace Kelly and Thelma Ritter that his neighbor killed someone, but he wasn't even sure if Grace Kelly and Thelma Ritter, and Wendell Corey for that matter, even existed. And therein lies the power of this movie, and what I think was so skillfully done. The film very much drops the viewer into the mind of the main character. She is a prime example of an unreliable narrator, but she doesn't know at certain points whether she is an unreliable narrator or not. And a big part of that comes from the lead performance. Madison Iseman stars as Rain, and she was really excellent in the movie. I have to admit, I'm not always the biggest fan of movies with young protagonists. I find myself more easily drawn to older characters, and I really appreciate the gravitas and depth of experience that a lot of older actors bring to films. So by contrast, I often find, or just naturally assume, that movies with a teenaged main character will be shallow or just less interesting. It might just be a bias on my part, but I know there are plenty like that. But the premise of this movie got me, and I was cautiously optimistic that I would enjoy it. And I did. But back to Madison Iseman. The first scene, which I'll talk about because it literally is the first couple minutes and won't spoil anything, but that first scene did have me a little worried. It starts with Rain being chased through a forest by a dark figure, and she ends up being buried alive. This turns out to be a hallucination, but from a performance perspective, I wasn't sure how I felt about her character. It felt a little overdone or just a bit too much. That quickly changed though, and she turned this into a really strong performance where this person lives day to day knowing that she can't totally believe what she's hearing and seeing, and no matter how much she might want to believe something is true, it just might not be. The reason for that is her character is supposed to be taking medication to manage her schizophrenia, but she frequently just doesn't take it because it makes her feel like she's sleepwalking through life and prevents her from taking part in her favorite pastime, which is painting. And all of that adds to the film. Her refusing to take her medication makes her parents and her doctor and other people at her school doubt what she says, no matter how convinced she might be that what she's saying is fact. She just brings so much emotion to the part, and that, paired with being so withdrawn at school, makes for a character that requires a lot of range, and she does a great job with it. Israel Broussard plays Caleb, the new friend she makes at school, who just moved to the area, so he has no history with Rain like her now former friends have. He's able to approach her without any baggage and accepts her as she is. I thought he was a really amazing actor, actually. I'm not familiar with him at all, but he had such a great energy to him, where he's kind of an awkward guy, like Rain, doesn't make friends too easily it seems, but he has a great charisma. He and Madison Iseman have really good chemistry, and his role as the one ally that doesn't really doubt her story is one that the audience can really get behind. I think he was excellent casting. As I mentioned, we can never be sure if the people Rain interacts with are even real, and the Caleb character is one of those. That aspect is even more aggravating because we like him a lot, and we know Rain does too. But that reasoning just feeds into the fact that maybe he is too perfect. Maybe her subconscious made him up. That back and forth is played with a lot throughout the movie, and I really appreciated that. They didn't solve it too quickly, and that was a good choice. Katherine Heigl and Harry Connick Jr. play Rain's parents. They're both quite good as well, I think. They both have similar roles as being supportive, but the strain of trying to manage Rain and her illness is wearing on them. They both have quite similar scenes that they have to play with Rain over and over, it felt like, so the characters aren't as interesting as the two younger leads, but I think they fit the movie very well and showed that protective but also unsure what to do next feeling really well. Eugenie Bondurant plays the neighbor that Rain begins to think has committed this kidnapping. and she was a real standout in the movie. Starting with her look. I don't want to say anything bad against her. I'm sure she's a very nice person in real life, but she comes across as extremely creepy in this film. Her very angular, gaunt face and movements are great elements to bring to a potentially villainous character like this. She is also one of Rain and Caleb's teachers at school, and she's able to play both sides of the character. At school and just on the street, she can come across as very normal, but she is able to twist that just slightly to make you feel very uneasy and suspicious very quickly. And all the while you're wondering, is she really guilty, or are we seeing what Rain is seeing? And that is tainting our view of her. It's a great part, and she plays it very well. I think another thing that is almost a character in the movie and informs a great deal of it is the sound design. We're often hearing what Rain hears, whether that be the voices of those around her, seeming to voice their thoughts to her, sometimes her voice and the thoughts she's having being made audible for us, and it all contributes to a sense of paranoia and fear. I thought it was so effective and really places us in her shoes. I also really enjoyed the set design, in particular the two houses that we spend a lot of the movie in, one being Rain's family's house and the other being the neighbors. Rain's house is so perfectly imperfect, which stood out to me. It felt real and lived in. The walls aren't painted perfectly. The trim and woodwork are a bit scuffed. The house feels cramped and messy. And all of that was a nice touch. It kind of drives me crazy when everyone's house in a movie is a spacious, well-decorated Hallmark type of house. So this was nice to see. The neighbor's house is a larger antique home, but what was interesting is how it's very austere and hardly has any furniture. We're told she recently inherited it, which would explain why she hasn't filled it with lots of furniture yet, but I liked how in the scenes where Rain is trying to investigate the house herself, there's not very many places to hide. It's not the usual psychopath's house cluttered with stuff and little corridors where someone might be hiding. It barely feels lived in, and I liked that. The movie was really well shot, with a lot of interesting shot choices. There were some really interestingly framed Dutch angles, all adding to a look that is kind of jarring at times. It all keeps you on edge and off balance, and that's the right feeling you want to evoke in this type of movie. While I'm on the visuals, there is something they do right from the start of the movie, where Rain has 3 questions that she's supposed to ask herself to determine whether whatever she's seeing is a hallucination or not. And they visualize that for us in the form of a checklist. And they do that a lot. Maybe a bit more than was needed. It works for constantly making sure we view every situation from Rain's perspective, but I did feel like they showed that a little too often. Fear of Rain was a nice surprise. I think it's a very suspenseful, tense film that is so effective at showing you this situation through the eyes of this character. So much so that I almost felt like I needed to question whether what I'm seeing is real right afterwards. Does it borrow from other thrillers like this? Absolutely. Like I said, Rear Window, Disturbia as well. Probably many others that have tried to copy that type of story, but I think it was really well written. Like I've said, very well acted, and has a nicely nuanced character at the center of it. And there were a couple of twists that I honestly had no idea were coming. Highly recommended. Thanks for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to check back to my channel, Hildebrand Productions. I would really appreciate it. Adios for now.